Waitress slipped a secret note beneath the Alpha King's receipt. It read, "Don't turn around. Run now." Why would someone choose a receipt for such a message? And what could those 5 urgent words possibly mean? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy gripping stories filled with mystery, suspense, and unforgettable twists, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you for being here and for your incredible support. It truly means the world to this channel. Before we begin, tell us in the comments. If you found a message like this, would you trust it or ignore it? Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's step into the story from the very first moment everything began. Don't turn around. The words echoed in Emily Carter's mind long before she ever wrote them, though she had no idea why. At exactly 8:17 p.m., the dinner rush wrapped itself around Blackstone Grill like a living tide, filling every polished booth and white linen table with conversations that blended into a warm hum beneath the soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers. Crystal glasses caught the amber glow of vintage chandeliers while the rich aroma of grilled ribeye, garlic butter, and fresh rosemary lingered in the air. Emily moved between crowded tables with practiced ease, balancing a heavy serving tray as if she'd been born carrying one. At 24, she had mastered the invisible art every great waitress eventually learned. Smile without interrupting. Listen without staring. Notice everything while pretending to notice nothing. Most guests remembered the food. Few ever remembered the person quietly making sure the evening unfolded without a flaw. She preferred it that way. Invisible people survived difficult days. Invisible people kept their jobs. Invisible people went home unnoticed. The front door opened, and for reasons she couldn't explain, the atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. No one gasped. No music stopped. No dramatic entrance announced itself. Yet conversations softened by a fraction, as though every instinct in the room recognized someone important before conscious thought could catch up. Emily glanced toward the entrance only because years of customer service had trained her to greet every arrival with the same polite attention. A tall man stepped inside wearing a charcoal jacket that fit perfectly without appearing expensive. Dark hair framed a calm, unreadable face, and silver-gray eyes swept across the dining room with the effortless confidence of someone who had spent his life entering unfamiliar places without asking permission. He carried no visible security, no display of wealth, no arrogance that demanded attention. Yet attention followed him anyway. The hostess smiled a little straighter. The bartender paused while polishing a glass. Even the manager instinctively adjusted his tie before walking over to welcome the guest personally. Emily found herself watching longer than she intended. Not because he was handsome, though he undeniably was, but because there was something unusually still about him. The restaurant buzzed with movement, laughter, clinking silverware, and ringing glasses, but he seemed untouched by any of it, like the quiet center of a turning storm. She quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own curiosity, and returned to delivering entrees before anyone noticed she'd hesitated. 10 minutes later, she passed table 12 carrying fresh iced tea when a different detail caught her attention. 3 men occupied separate tables across the dining room. None acknowledged one another. One studied a menu without turning a page. Another checked his watch every few minutes. The third slowly stirred coffee that had long since gone cold. Individually, nothing seemed unusual. Together, something felt rehearsed. Emily couldn't explain why that realization settled so heavily in her chest. Experience had taught her to trust patterns more than appearances, and tonight the patterns refused to fit. She placed another plate before a smiling family, thanked them warmly, and looked up just long enough to see the quiet stranger unfolding his receipt with measured hands. For the first time all evening, an uneasy feeling whispered through her thoughts that tonight was about to become something no ordinary shift could ever prepare her for. Emily carried a fresh pitcher of iced tea toward the center aisle, but her attention kept drifting back to the strange rhythm unfolding around table 12. Years of working double shifts had taught her that people always revealed themselves through habits they never realized they had. Couples leaned toward each other. Families interrupted one another. Business partners glanced at their phones every few minutes. These 3 men did none of those things. Instead, each seemed focused on the quiet stranger without ever allowing their eyes to rest on him for more than a heartbeat. It was subtle enough that another server would have dismissed it as coincidence, Yet Emily felt the pattern tightening with every pass she made through the dining room. She refilled a glass for an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, wished them a wonderful evening, and continued moving with the same relaxed smile every customer expected. Inside, however, a quiet uneasiness continued to grow. The stranger remained remarkably composed. He had ordered nothing extravagant, only grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, sparkling water, and black coffee after dinner. Everything about his choices suggested someone who valued routine over luxury. Even the way he thanked Emily stood out. He looked directly into her eyes when he spoke, offering a calm, genuine appreciation instead of the distracted politeness she usually heard hundreds of times a week. There was no impatience, no entitlement, only quiet confidence that somehow carried more authority than the loudest voice in the room. Emily found herself wondering what kind of life produced that kind of composure. Before she could answer her own thoughts, one of the suited men stood and slowly crossed toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. His pace appeared casual, yet his eyes briefly met those of another man seated near the front windows. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. A silent signal. Emily stopped beside the beverage station, pretending to organize clean glasses while she watched their reflections in the polished mirror behind the shelves. The second man adjusted his jacket sleeve. The third quietly placed cash beneath his untouched coffee cup without asking for the check. None of them appeared rushed, but every movement seemed carefully timed. A cool chill crept across Emily's shoulders despite the warmth inside the restaurant. She remembered something her father had once told her before he retired from the county sheriff's office. Most trouble announces itself long before anyone hears raised voices. You just have to notice the details everyone else ignores. Emily had laughed at the advice back then. Tonight it returned with unsettling clarity. She picked up another tray and approached table 12 just as the quiet stranger finished signing his receipt. The black leather folder rested near the edge of the table, waiting to be collected. Her eyes lifted for only an instant, and she noticed the stranger subtly studying the reflection in the restaurant window instead of the room itself. He had noticed something too. He simply refused to show it. Emily reached for the receipt with steady hands, forcing herself to breathe normally. Around her, conversations continued, silverware chimed softly against porcelain plates, and laughter floated beneath the music as though nothing unusual existed beyond ordinary Friday night comfort. Yet every instinct told her that the peaceful picture surrounding table 12 had become impossibly fragile, balanced on a single invisible moment that had not happened yet but was moving closer with every passing second. Emily slipped the signed receipt into the black leather folder and turned toward the service station, but before she reached it, a quiet sound stopped her. It was not loud enough for anyone else to notice, only a few carefully spoken words carried between the steady rhythm of clinking glasses and low conversation. She did not mean to listen. Years in the restaurant had simply trained her ears to separate ordinary chatter from anything unusual. As she paused beside the espresso machine, pretending to arrange clean coffee cups, a familiar voice from one of the suited men drifted through the narrow opening between two booths. "He always leaves through the east entrance." Another answered so softly she almost missed it. "Timing matters. Wait until he stands." Emily felt the warmth leave her hands. Her pulse quickened, but she kept stacking porcelain cups one at a time, refusing to let the movement of her fingers betray the sudden fear growing inside her chest. She slowly glanced toward the mirrored backsplash behind the coffee station. The reflection revealed the three men without requiring her to turn her head. One checked the time again. Another casually folded his menu despite having ordered nothing. The third remained seated, watching the dining room through the reflection in the restaurant window, instead of looking directly at anyone. They moved like strangers, yet every action seemed connected by an invisible thread. Emily swallowed carefully. Her father had once explained that people planning something rarely spoke much because preparation happened long before words became necessary. She remembered rolling her eyes at the lesson years ago. Now every sentence returned with uncomfortable precision. She forced herself to continue working, delivering a dessert to a family celebrating a birthday before collecting empty plates from another table. Her smile never disappeared, but it no longer felt natural. Every few seconds her eyes searched the room without appearing to search at all. The quiet guest at table 12 had almost finished his coffee. He thanked her again when she refilled the cup, offering the same calm expression that somehow made the crowded restaurant seem quieter around him. Emily wanted to say something, anything that might explain the uneasy feeling pressing against her thoughts, but what could she possibly say? She had overheard only fragments of a conversation. No direct threat. No clear explanation. Just enough to make her instincts refuse to stay silent. She carried the payment folder back toward the register while trying to convince herself she was imagining connections that did not exist. Halfway there, she noticed another detail. The manager had stepped into the office to answer a phone call. The hostess was helping a large party near the entrance. Every other server appeared occupied with full sections. For the first time all evening, no one seemed to be watching table 12. Except her. Emily opened the payment folder to organize the receipt before filing it away. Her fingers rested on the blank customer copy for only a moment. An idea appeared so suddenly it almost startled her. It was simple, quiet, and impossible to explain. She looked toward the stranger again. He reached for his wallet, completely unaware that 3 different pairs of eyes seemed to be measuring every second he remained seated. Emily's heartbeat echoed in her ears. She had less than a minute to decide whether she would ignore the feeling that refused to leave her alone or trust the quiet voice inside her that insisted tonight was different from every other shift she had ever worked. Emily stood motionless behind the register for only 2 seconds, yet they felt impossibly long. Every reasonable thought urged her to stay out of someone else's business. She was a waitress, not an investigator. She had bills to pay, rent due at the end of the month, and a younger brother depending on the small checks she sent whenever she could. One wrong accusation could cost her everything she had worked so hard to keep. Even so, the quiet warning inside her refused to disappear. She looked once more toward table 12. The stranger had finished his coffee and was placing his credit card back into a simple leather wallet. His expression remained composed, almost thoughtful, as though he had already accepted whatever the evening intended to bring. Around him, nothing appeared unusual to the dozens of guests enjoying their dinners. A child laughed over a slice of chocolate cake. An older couple shared a dessert with 2 forks. Someone near the bar celebrated a birthday while glasses rose in a cheerful toast. The ordinary warmth of the restaurant almost convinced Emily she had imagined everything. Almost. She opened the payment folder again and stared at the blank customer copy resting beneath the signed receipt. Her fingers tightened around the restaurant pen. Without allowing herself another chance to reconsider, she turned the paper over and carefully printed 7 simple words in neat block letters. Do not turn around. Run now. She paused for a heartbeat, reading the sentence twice. It sounded dramatic, almost unbelievable, but shortening it would only make the meaning less clear. She folded the paper once, slipped it beneath the receipt where it would not immediately catch another customer's attention, then closed the folder before doubt could stop her. Her breathing grew slower as she walked back across the dining room. Every step felt louder than the last, although her shoes barely whispered against the polished hardwood floor. She reached the table with the same professional smile she had worn all evening. Thank you for dining with us tonight, she said warmly. I hope everything was exactly the way you wanted. The stranger offered a faint smile that reached his silver-gray eyes. Everything was excellent, he replied with calm sincerity. Especially the service. Emily nodded, gently placed the payment folder beside his hand, and resisted every urge to linger. If she stayed even 1 second too long, someone might notice. If she looked nervous, someone might remember her face. She turned naturally and walked toward the kitchen entrance, forcing herself not to glance back. The service hallway suddenly felt much quieter than the dining room. She picked up a stack of clean plates simply to give her trembling hands something useful to hold. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Then she heard the soft sound of the leather folder opening somewhere behind her. She did not turn. She could not. Every instinct told her that whatever happened next had already moved beyond her control. The only thing she knew with certainty was that one small piece of folded paper now rested beneath a receipt, carrying a message from a woman who knew almost nothing about the man reading it except that leaving without a warning no longer felt like an option. Adrian Blackwood lowered his eyes to the receipt without changing a single expression. To anyone watching, he appeared to be checking the total one last time before leaving. His fingers remained perfectly steady as they unfolded the small piece of paper hidden beneath it. 7 handwritten words met his gaze. Do not turn around. Run now. For the briefest instant, time seemed to slow around him. He did not lift his head. He did not search the room. He simply read the message again, allowing each word to settle into the silence behind his calm expression. Most people would have dismissed it as a prank or an act of misplaced concern. Adrian was not most people. He had spent years learning that unexpected warnings rarely arrived without a reason. The smallest detail often carried the greatest truth. He quietly folded the note and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket with the same unhurried movement he used to return his wallet. Across the dining room, nothing appeared different. Families continued eating. Servers crossed between tables carrying fresh plates. The birthday celebration near the bar erupted into cheerful applause as a cake topped with sparkling candles appeared. Yet Adrian noticed what others did not. Reflections in polished windows shifted almost imperceptibly. A man near the entrance checked the time once more before looking toward the exit instead of the door. Another customer adjusted his chair without taking another bite of food. The room remained peaceful, but the rhythm beneath that peace had changed. Adrian reached for his coffee one final time, taking a slow sip while allowing his eyes to study only what appeared naturally before him. He never looked over his shoulder. He never searched directly for danger. Instead, every polished surface became a quiet mirror. The silver coffee pot resting on a nearby service cart. The framed glass artwork hanging across the dining room. The dark screen of a television above the bar. Together they revealed enough to confirm one thing. The anonymous warning had not come from fear. It had come from careful observation. Meanwhile, Emily remained inside the service hallway pretending to organize clean silverware. She counted each breath, trying to focus on ordinary tasks instead of wondering whether the stranger had believed her message or quietly thrown it away. Every passing second increased the weight pressing against her chest. She reminded herself that she had done all she could. The decision no longer belonged to her. A fellow server walked past carrying a tray of desserts and smiled. "You look tired," she said. Emily forced a small laugh. "Long shift." The answer sounded believable enough. Still, she could not shake the feeling that invisible lines had begun crossing beneath the surface of an otherwise ordinary evening. Back at table 12, Adrian slowly stood, buttoned his charcoal jacket, and thanked a passing busser with genuine courtesy before taking a measured step toward the main aisle. There was no urgency in his movements, only quiet confidence. Yet inside his pocket, the folded note rested close to his heart, carrying the handwriting of a woman he had met only minutes before but whose instincts had already earned something surprisingly rare: his attention. And somewhere across the restaurant, without either of them realizing it, two very different lives had already begun moving toward the same impossible destination. Adrian walked toward the front entrance with the same measured pace he had used when he entered the restaurant, neither slowing nor hurrying. The folded note remained inside his jacket pocket, not as a warning that inspired fear, but as a question that demanded an answer. He reached the polished glass door, rested one hand lightly on the handle, then stopped as though remembering something insignificant. Instead of stepping outside, he turned slightly toward the hostess with a courteous smile. "I almost forgot to ask," he said calmly. "Do you happen to know whether your coffee beans are locally roasted?" The young hostess blinked with pleasant surprise before explaining that they came from a small family-owned roastery about 30 miles away. Adrian listened with genuine interest, nodding once or twice as though the conversation mattered far more than the passing seconds. Behind him, reflected in the glass entrance, one suited man slowed his walk toward the exit while another quietly remained seated. Whatever timing they had expected had suddenly shifted. Adrian thanked the hostess sincerely before deciding to visit the restroom after all, apologizing for changing his mind. His footsteps carried him away from the entrance and deeper into the restaurant. The adjustment appeared spontaneous, yet every movement had been calculated. Near the service hallway, Emily noticed him changing direction. Confusion flickered across her face for only a moment. She had expected him either to ignore the message completely or leave immediately. Instead, he had done neither. Somehow he had understood that the note was asking him to think rather than panic. She lowered her eyes and continued polishing silverware, pretending not to notice him passing nearby. Their eyes met for less than a second. No smile. No nod. No sign that either recognized the silent conversation that had already taken place between them. Yet something unspoken settled in that brief glance. Gratitude on one side, relief on the other. Adrian continued down the hallway until he reached the quiet corridor leading toward the restrooms. The polished marble floor reflected the soft ceiling lights, and the sounds of the dining room faded into distant echoes. He paused beside a decorative window overlooking the parking lot. Without appearing obvious, he observed the reflections on the glass. Several vehicles sat exactly where they had been when he arrived, but one dark sport utility vehicle now occupied a space with its engine still running. Its headlights remained off even though the evening had grown darker. Adrian studied the reflection for only a heartbeat before continuing forward. Information collected. Nothing more. Back inside the dining room, one of the suited men quietly returned to his untouched meal, while another stepped outside to answer what appeared to be a phone call. Emily noticed both movements while delivering fresh bread to a nearby table. The careful rhythm she had sensed earlier had changed once again. Whatever plan had existed was no longer unfolding the way its architects expected. She breathed a little easier, though not completely. The strange feeling inside her had not disappeared. It had only become quieter. As Adrian washed his hands beneath warm water and looked into the mirror above the sink, his expression remained calm, but his thoughts returned to the young waitress with kind eyes and remarkable instincts. She had risked her own peace of mind to protect someone she did not know, asking for nothing in return. In a world where caution often outweighed compassion, that choice was rarer than most people realized. And for the first time in many years, Adrian found himself unexpectedly curious about the woman who had trusted her conscience more than her fear. Emily told herself the evening was returning to normal, but the restaurant no longer felt like the same place she had walked into before sunset. The familiar sounds remained unchanged. Glasses touched with soft chimes. Laughter drifted across the dining room. The scent of warm bread and fresh herbs still floated from the kitchen. Yet beneath the comfortable rhythm, something invisible continued to shift. She collected empty plates from a corner booth, thanked a family for visiting, and delivered fresh coffee to an elderly gentleman reading the local newspaper. Every movement appeared effortless, but her attention quietly measured the room without pause. The three suited men had abandoned the careful balance they had maintained earlier. One now lingered near the entrance, pretending to study framed photographs decorating the lobby wall. Another stood beside the hostess station as though waiting for someone to arrive. The third remained seated, but his untouched dinner had long since grown cold. None of them seemed impatient. If anything, they appeared to be adapting. Emily recognized that look. It was the expression people wore when a simple plan suddenly became complicated. Adrian returned from the hallway with the same calm presence that had first caught her attention. Nothing about him suggested concern. He paused near the reception desk, thanked the hostess once more for the recommendation about the coffee beans, and casually asked whether there was another exit available, because he enjoyed taking evening walks after dinner. The hostess smiled politely and explained that employees occasionally used the kitchen exit, but guests generally preferred the front entrance because it opened directly toward the main parking area. Adrian nodded with quiet appreciation, as though the answer satisfied nothing more than ordinary curiosity. Emily overheard the exchange while arranging clean menus nearby. She realized he was gathering information without alarming anyone. More importantly, he was giving everyone watching him a reason to believe his next decision remained uncertain. Across the room, one suited man subtly changed position after hearing the conversation. Another glanced toward the front windows before returning to his chair. The invisible pattern shifted again. Emily felt a spark of cautious hope. Whoever these men were, they were no longer certain what Adrian intended to do. A few minutes later, the manager emerged from his office carrying a clipboard, thanking the staff for handling the busy dinner rush so smoothly. He stopped beside Emily with an encouraging smile. "You handled table 12 beautifully tonight," he said. The gentleman complimented the service before he left the dining area. Emily blinked with surprise. "He did." The manager nodded. Not many guests take the time to do that anymore. Before she could answer, he walked away to assist another server. Emily looked toward Adrian almost instinctively. He happened to glance in her direction at the same moment. His expression remained composed, yet there was unmistakable kindness in his eyes. Not gratitude that demanded recognition. Not curiosity searching for explanations. Simply quiet respect. It lasted only a heartbeat before both returned to their separate responsibilities. Neither spoke a word. Neither needed to. The note had already said everything that mattered. As the evening continued unfolding around them, Emily began to understand that courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was nothing more than trusting a feeling no one else could see. And somewhere beyond the restaurant's warm lights, events were already changing course because one ordinary waitress had chosen compassion over silence, while one extraordinary man had been wise enough to listen. The clock above the bar quietly clicked past 9 o'clock, and the dinner crowd began thinning just enough for empty tables to appear across the dining room. Emily stacked clean glasses behind the service station, trying to convince herself the uneasy feeling had finally passed. The three suited men were no longer holding their original positions. Instead, they had spread farther apart, blending naturally among the remaining guests. To anyone else, they looked like ordinary customers finishing a late meal. To Emily, they looked like people patiently waiting for a different opportunity. Adrian remained unhurried. Rather than walking directly toward the front entrance, he paused near a display featuring photographs of the restaurant's history. He studied each framed picture with quiet interest, occasionally smiling at handwritten captions beneath faded black and white images. It appeared to be nothing more than an appreciative guest enjoying local history. Yet every extra minute altered the invisible rhythm surrounding him. One suited man stepped outside, only to return less than a minute later with an expression that revealed quiet uncertainty. Another discreetly checked his phone before slipping it back into his pocket without making a call. Their confidence was beginning to fade because the evening was no longer following the schedule they had expected. Emily noticed something else as she carried a tray of fresh coffee toward a nearby table. The dark sport utility vehicle outside had disappeared from the parking lot. In its place, a silver sedan now occupied the same general area, its headlights briefly flashing before turning off again. The change lasted only a moment, but Adrian seemed to notice it as well through the reflection in the front windows. He never stared directly outside. Instead, he continued admiring the photographs while quietly collecting another piece of information. Emily wondered how someone could remain so calm when everything around him felt increasingly uncertain. His composure did not resemble carelessness. It looked more like experience, as though he had spent years learning that patience often revealed what haste concealed. The manager approached Adrian with a friendly smile, thanking him once again for visiting and mentioning that the restaurant would be closing within the hour. Adrian thanked him sincerely before asking whether there happened to be a bookstore within walking distance. The question sounded completely ordinary, yet Emily immediately understood its purpose. Every casual conversation changed expectations. Every unexpected stop forced unseen observers to rethink their next move. She found herself admiring the quiet intelligence behind such simple decisions. A few minutes later, the hostess became occupied helping an elderly couple locate their car in the parking lot. The front entrance stood briefly unattended. One of the suited men instinctively shifted closer to the doorway before realizing Adrian had not moved at all. He casually picked up a brochure from the reception counter instead, pretending he had intended to read it all along. Emily almost smiled. The balance had changed completely. Earlier that evening she had felt powerless, convinced that all she could offer was a handwritten warning on a folded receipt. Now she realized that a single thoughtful choice could alter far more than anyone expected. Adrian finally turned away from the photographs and slowly adjusted the cuff of his jacket. Inside the pocket, the folded note remained exactly where he had placed it. It was no longer simply a warning. It had become proof that even in a room full of strangers, one person had chosen kindness without expecting recognition. And somewhere beyond the warm lights of Blackstone Grill, unseen eyes were beginning to realize that the quiet man they had underestimated was quietly rewriting the evening one patient decision at a time. Emily checked the wall clock again. Only 40 minutes remained before her shift ended, yet the night refused to settle into the ordinary routine she had expected. Most of the families had already gone home, leaving only scattered conversations drifting through the restaurant. The lights appeared softer now, reflecting warmly across polished wood and quiet tables waiting to be reset for tomorrow. Even the music seemed slower, wrapping the room in a calm that almost felt convincing. Almost. Adrian accepted a complimentary cup of fresh coffee from the manager and thanked him with the same quiet courtesy he had shown everyone throughout the evening. He chose a seat near the front windows instead of returning to his original table, giving the impression that he simply wanted a peaceful moment before leaving. Emily noticed the change immediately. From that position, the reflections on the glass revealed nearly the entire entrance without requiring him to look directly toward it. Once again, he had selected the place that offered the most information while appearing completely relaxed. She admired the patience behind every decision he made. It was as though he never reacted to the world around him. Instead, he allowed the world to reveal itself first. Across the dining room, the three suited men quietly adjusted once more. One casually requested another refill of coffee he had barely touched. Another wandered toward the dessert display, pretending to study the pastries inside the refrigerated case. The third stepped outside for several seconds before returning with an expression that remained calm but noticeably more focused than before. Emily realized they were no longer following a plan. They were responding to Adrian's choices one step at a time, always arriving a little too late. She delivered the final dessert of the evening to a young couple celebrating an engagement and found herself smiling sincerely for the first time in hours. Something inside her had changed as well. Earlier she had acted from fear that someone might be in trouble. Now she felt something steadier. Confidence. Not because she understood everything happening around her, but because she had trusted her conscience when remaining silent would have been easier. As she returned toward the service station, Adrian gently set his coffee cup aside and removed the folded note from his jacket pocket for the first time since reading it. Hidden beneath the edge of the table where no one else could see, he unfolded it once more. His eyes rested on the simple handwriting for several quiet seconds before he smiled almost imperceptibly. Not because the message had frightened him, but because it reminded him that genuine courage rarely announced itself with loud words or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it appeared in ordinary handwriting on inexpensive receipt paper, offered by someone with nothing to gain. He carefully folded the note again and placed it back inside his pocket with surprising care, as though it had already become something worth protecting. Emily happened to glance toward him at that exact moment. Their eyes met across the dining room, and although neither spoke, she sensed that he had understood far more than the words themselves. He had understood why she wrote them. The strange tension that had filled the restaurant all evening did not disappear, but it shifted into something quieter, something waiting just beyond the walls of Blackstone Grill. Emily could not explain why, yet every instinct whispered that the most important part of this story had not begun inside the restaurant at all. It had begun the moment one ordinary act of kindness found the one person who truly knew how to recognize its value. The restaurant's closing announcement drifted softly through the speakers, thanking guests for visiting and wishing everyone a pleasant evening. Chairs remained occupied at only a handful of tables now, and the once lively dining room had settled into a peaceful silence broken only by quiet conversations and the gentle sound of dishes being collected from the kitchen. Emily folded fresh linen napkins behind the service station while stealing one careful glance toward Adrian. He stood near the entrance once again, appearing ready to leave at last. Nothing about his posture suggested urgency. If anything, he looked like a man appreciating the final moments of a relaxing dinner before stepping into the cool night air. Yet Emily noticed one small detail she had not seen before. His attention was no longer centered on the room. It seemed to rest somewhere beyond it, as though he had already reached a conclusion invisible to everyone else. Adrian thanked the manager one final time, shook his hand warmly, and complimented the staff for creating an atmosphere that reminded him of small-town hospitality. The manager smiled with obvious pride, promising that he would always be welcome back. Nearby, the hostess wished him a safe drive home. Adrian returned her kindness with genuine gratitude before taking another slow step toward the glass doors. At that exact moment, one of the suited men quietly straightened his jacket while another drifted closer to the entrance under the harmless appearance of preparing to leave. Emily's heartbeat quickened once more. The pattern had returned. Different positions. Same invisible connection. She tightened her grip on the folded napkins, wondering whether she should speak this time. Before she could decide, Adrian stopped once again. He reached into his pocket, removed a simple business card, and handed it to the manager with an easy smile. "If you ever decide to expand," he said calmly, "I know people who appreciate places that still value genuine service." The manager accepted the card politely, though his expression changed almost immediately after reading the name printed across its surface. Surprise flickered through his eyes before he looked back at Adrian with unmistakable respect. He opened his mouth as though to say something, then hesitated. Adrian answered with the slightest shake of his head, silently asking him not to make a scene. The manager understood at once. He slipped the card carefully into his pocket and nodded without another word. Emily watched the brief exchange from across the dining room, unable to see the name on the card but recognizing that something significant had just happened. Respect had replaced ordinary courtesy. The manager's posture had subtly changed, standing a little straighter than before. Adrian offered one final appreciative smile before turning toward the door again. This time, no one attempted to stop him with conversation. As he reached for the handle, the reflection in the glass revealed the suited men adjusting once more, their confidence replaced by careful uncertainty. Adrian did not acknowledge them. Instead, he quietly rested one hand inside his jacket pocket where the folded note remained protected. The paper had become more than a warning. It had become a reminder that true character often revealed itself in the smallest decisions. Emily stood beneath the warm restaurant lights, unaware that the name written on the business card had already answered questions she had not even thought to ask. She still believed she had helped an unusually composed stranger. She did not yet realize that the quiet guest she had protected with nothing more than courage and honest instinct was a man whose true identity carried far greater weight than anyone inside Blackstone Grill could possibly imagine. The glass door opened with a soft chime, allowing the cool night air to drift into the warmth of Blackstone Grill. Adrian stepped outside without hesitation, his polished shoes meeting the quiet sidewalk as though he had never carried a single concern through the evening. Behind him, the three suited men exchanged nearly invisible glances before slowly following at different intervals, careful not to appear connected. Emily remained inside, watching through the front windows while pretending to straighten the display near the hostess stand. She told herself that her responsibility had ended the moment she slipped the folded note beneath the receipt. Even so, she could not shake the feeling that walking away completely would somehow be wrong. The manager approached her quietly, his expression unusually thoughtful. "Emily," he said in a gentle voice, "do you know who that gentleman was?" She shook her head. "No, sir. Just another guest, I thought." The manager looked toward the parking lot before lowering his voice. "I recognized the name on his card." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Adrian Blackwood does not simply own businesses. People across the country know him for something much larger." Emily frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. The manager smiled with quiet disbelief. "There are people who call him the Alpha King." The words settled into the silence between them. Emily almost laughed, believing it had to be some unusual nickname given to an influential businessman. Yet the manager was not smiling anymore. His expression carried genuine respect, almost reverence. "I have only heard stories," he continued softly. "Powerful companies, extraordinary leadership, communities that trust him without question. Most people never realize who he is because he prefers to move through the world like everyone else." Emily looked through the glass again. Adrian stood beside a dark sedan beneath the glow of a parking lot light, speaking briefly with an elderly couple whose car refused to start. He listened patiently, rolled up the sleeve of his charcoal jacket, and spent several quiet minutes helping them check the battery connection beneath the hood. A moment later the engine came to life. The elderly man smiled with visible relief while his wife thanked Adrian with both hands wrapped around his. Adrian accepted their gratitude with the same humble smile he had offered every restaurant employee throughout the evening. There was no audience outside, no cameras, no expectation of recognition. He simply helped because someone needed help. Emily felt something shift quietly inside her. The title the manager had spoken no longer seemed impossible. Leadership was not always measured by wealth or influence. Sometimes it appeared in the smallest choices, repeated consistently when no one expected them. Across the parking lot, Adrian looked toward the restaurant one final time. Through the front windows, his eyes found Emily standing beneath the warm lights. He offered the slightest nod, almost too small to notice. It was not a farewell. It was acknowledgement. Respect given freely to someone who had acted with courage when remaining silent would have been safer. Emily instinctively returned the gesture with a quiet smile of her own, still unaware that this simple exchange marked the beginning of a bond older than either of them could yet understand. Somewhere deep within Adrian, a feeling long buried beneath years of discipline stirred for the first time in countless seasons. It was calm, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. The woman who had trusted her heart over her fear had become someone he knew he would never forget. Emily remained by the front window long after Adrian's car disappeared beyond the rows of maple trees lining the parking lot. The restaurant slowly emptied around her as chairs were turned upside down onto polished tables, and the last dishes disappeared into the kitchen. Someone switched off the music, leaving only the quiet hum of refrigerators and the distant sound of running water from the dishwashing station. It felt like every other closing shift she had ever worked, yet nothing inside her felt ordinary anymore. She folded her apron carefully, tucked a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear, and glanced once more toward the empty parking lot. She still could not explain why a stranger's safety had mattered so deeply to her. She only knew that ignoring the feeling would have haunted her far longer than acting on it. Across town, Adrian guided his sedan through peaceful streets washed in the soft glow of streetlights. He drove without hurry, allowing the silence inside the vehicle to settle around him. At the next red light, he reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded the small piece of receipt paper once again. The handwritten message remained simple, almost ordinary, but he noticed something new each time he looked at it. The letters were steady. The lines were carefully spaced. Whoever had written them had been frightened enough to act, yet calm enough to think clearly. That combination was remarkably rare. Most people chose panic or hesitation. Emily had chosen courage wrapped in quiet wisdom. Adrian folded the paper with the same care as before and placed it inside a slim leather card holder instead of returning it to his pocket. Some objects carried value because they were expensive. Others became priceless because they marked the exact moment life changed direction. This one belonged to the second kind. Several miles later, his phone vibrated through the car's speaker system. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Everything has been reviewed," the caller said. "The situation at the restaurant has already dissolved. No further concern remains." Adrian acknowledged the update with only a few quiet words before ending the call. He did not ask about the people who had quietly followed him. He had already learned what mattered most that evening. The greatest discovery had not been hidden in the actions of strangers. It had been found in the character of one young woman who refused to ignore her conscience. Back at Blackstone Grill, Emily stepped outside after locking the front door with the manager. The cool night breeze carried the scent of pine trees and fresh rain drifting in from the nearby hills. She looked up at a sky scattered with bright stars, drawing one slow breath before beginning the short walk toward her aging sedan. The evening should have ended there, quietly fading into another ordinary memory. Instead, she found herself smiling without realizing it. Somewhere inside, a small sense of peace had replaced the uncertainty that had followed her throughout the night. She had done the right thing. That alone was enough. Neither Emily nor Adrian understood that destiny had already begun weaving their separate lives together long before either of them recognized its design. One believed she had simply protected a courteous stranger. The other knew he had encountered a rare soul whose kindness could not be purchased, commanded, or forgotten. Under the same quiet American night sky, both carried home the memory of a folded note, unaware that it had become the first page of a story neither of them would ever be able to leave behind. The following Friday arrived with the same golden sunset that had colored the windows of Blackstone Grill a week earlier. Yet Emily sensed an unfamiliar anticipation she could not explain. The restaurant welcomed another busy evening as familiar faces filled the booths. Laughter rose above the quiet music, and the comforting aroma of fresh bread drifted through the dining room. Life had returned to its ordinary rhythm, but every now and then she caught herself glancing toward the front entrance without knowing why. She never admitted it to anyone, not even to herself, but a small part of her wondered whether the courteous stranger would ever return. Across the city, inside a private office overlooking the skyline, Adrian unlocked a handcrafted wooden cabinet, reserved for the few possessions that carried genuine meaning. There were no expensive watches displayed inside, no awards, no photographs celebrating success. Instead, the shelves held simple reminders of moments that had shaped the man he had become. A faded compass inherited from his grandfather, a handwritten letter from his late mother, a weathered leather journal filled with promises he intended to keep. From his wallet, he carefully removed the folded receipt paper and placed it inside a protective glass case no larger than the palm of his hand. 7 ordinary words rested beneath the clear surface, preserved with the same care as every priceless memory surrounding them. His closest advisor quietly entered the office and paused in surprise. "You are keeping that?" he asked with respectful curiosity. Adrian smiled without taking his eyes off the note. "Some people reveal themselves through years of conversation," he answered calmly. "Others reveal everything worth knowing in a single decision." The advisor nodded thoughtfully, understanding there was no need for further explanation. Before leaving, he placed a folder on Adrian's desk. Inside rested a brief report containing only one highlighted line. Emily Carter, 24 years old. Blackstone Grill. Outstanding employee evaluations. No disciplinary record. Known for helping coworkers without being asked. Adrian closed the folder almost immediately. He had not requested an investigation into her private life. He had asked only one question. Was her kindness genuine? The answer had already been clear long before the report arrived. Back at the restaurant, the front door opened with its familiar chime. Emily looked up automatically, expecting another customer eager for dinner. Instead, she saw a delivery driver carrying a small white envelope addressed simply to her. There was no company logo, no return address, only her name written neatly across the front. Confused, she thanked the driver and waited until the dinner rush slowed before carefully opening it. Inside rested a simple cream-colored card with elegant handwriting. "Thank you for trusting your heart when caution would have been easier. The world becomes safer because people like you still exist." There was no signature, yet she recognized the quiet dignity behind every word. Tucked behind the card was a single-pressed white oak leaf, perfectly preserved. Emily smiled softly, slipping both items into the pocket of her apron as warmth spread quietly through her heart. She still did not know what the future would bring. She did not know that destiny had already begun drawing 2 very different lives toward the same path. She only knew that one ordinary act of courage had been remembered instead of forgotten. And somewhere beyond the city lights, beneath the endless American sky, an Alpha King carried a folded note as a reminder that true loyalty is never demanded by power. It is earned forever by kindness.